The Colbert stage was conditioned for charm and wit, not friction. The lights were warm, the cameras silent, the audience eager. But beneath the calm, there was tension, the kind that arrives when unexpected sparks are about to ignite. Jennifer Lawrence walked onto the stage, waved, and greeted the audience with a practiced grin. She was there to promote her latest film and to talk about navigating fame with humor and humility. Her terms were simple: keep it light. No invasive questions, no sensationalist baiting, no agenda-driven ambush. Stephen Colbert's team agreed, or so Jennifer was told. For the first few minutes, everything was smooth. Colbert asked about her character. She joked about her co-stars. Laughter, ease, the sort of moment audiences lived for. Then something shifted. Colbert paused, leaned forward, and said, "Jen, you've become a symbol of Hollywood toxicity. Call-out culture, social media outrage, taking offense everywhere. How do you see your role in all of that?" The room stiffened. Jennifer held her composure. "I think there's a conversation to be had. But conflating awareness with cancel culture is lazy." Colbert nodded. "Fair. But you've shared opinions. Spoken up about gender pay disparity, sexual misconduct in the industry, even politics. Some argue Hollywood should stay out of it, stick to acting. Wouldn't it be simpler to stay silent?" A laugh rippled across the audience. But Jennifer's response cut through it. "Simplicity isn't why I became an actor. Silence isn't why I speak up." Colbert raised an eyebrow. "But has speaking up hurt your career? Your brand?" Jennifer looked down for a moment. The laughter faded. The warmth dissipated. She said quietly, "If speaking truth costs me roles or fans, I'll carry that. Because speaking truth matters more." Before cheeks warmed and confidence returned, Colbert asked sharply, "But what about backlash? Paid roles? Box office? Isn't there guilt in fueling tribal divides?" That was the pivot. Jennifer exhaled. She said slowly, clearly, "I didn't come here to defend myself or justify my existence. I came to talk about a movie." A hush fell across the set. Then she said, "And this is not what I signed up for." Now, before everyone tries to label this a celebrity meltdown or spin it to fit agendas, keep in mind this wasn't planned. Studios don't clear questions like this with guests. Colbert doesn't go after people without wanting something out of them. But we're not editing the moment. We're letting it stand. If you want to see humanity under pressure, unfiltered, unscripted, hit subscribe now. Because what Jennifer says next changed everything. Colbert smiled tightly. "I get it. Maybe this deserves a different stage. Or a different conversation." Jennifer rose. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't look down or away. She looked right at him. She said, "Then let's end it. Because I won't explain my integrity on someone else's terms." She turned and walked off. The audience was silent. No music played. No lights dimmed. Just the echo of a step that said more than words ever could. Backstage, the hallway outside the Colbert studio was hushed. Jennifer Lawrence stood still, her breath shallow but steady. A production assistant handed her a water bottle. She didn't take it. She didn't need comfort. She needed space. Behind the curtain, Colbert's team scrambled. One producer whispered, "Should we cut to commercial?" Another said, "Do we bring her back?" Stephen Colbert sat motionless, still in his chair, staring into the audience. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were whispering. Some had their phones out, unsure if they were witnessing a breakdown or a breakthrough. Stephen finally leaned into the mic. "Well, that was unexpected." There were a few polite chuckles. Then silence again. He said, "Jennifer Lawrence just reminded us that sometimes the real interview isn't the one you plan. It's the one that happens when someone refuses to play along." He tried to move on. The cue cards were still on his desk. The next guest was waiting in the wings. But the energy had changed. Backstage, Jennifer was met by her publicist. The woman said, "You don't have to say anything. We'll handle it." Jennifer replied, "I said everything I needed to say." She didn't storm out. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just walked quietly to her dressing room and closed the door behind her. Meanwhile, online, the moment had already spread. The clip, only 12 seconds long, showed Jennifer standing, speaking her final words, and walking off stage. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Some people called her unprofessional. Others called her brave. But most were asking one question: what exactly did she walk away from? And slowly, people began replaying the segment. They watched the way Colbert framed his questions. They noticed the interruptions. the assumptions, the undercurrent of challenge beneath the smile. And they started to understand. It wasn't a clash over ideas. It was a clash over boundaries. The next morning, Jennifer posted nothing. No tweet, no statement, no explanation. But others did. Actresses, activists, journalists, people who had felt the same pressure to be gracious while being cornered. People who knew what it meant to be asked to justify your values under the pretense of curiosity. One post read, "Jennifer Lawrence didn't lose her temper. She claimed her space." Another, "Not everything needs to be answered. Not everyone deserves a response. Silence can be louder than any applause." Back in New York, Colbert opened his show that night with a rare moment of reflection. He said, "Last night, something real happened on this stage. And while I may have missed the mark, Jennifer Lawrence didn't." The audience clapped. Not out of habit, out of recognition. He added, "This show is built on the idea that comedy can open conversation. But comedy without care becomes something else." And last night reminded me that even a seasoned host can forget that. It was one of the few times Colbert had ever publicly acknowledged a guest walking off. But Jennifer wasn't looking for an apology. She had already moved on. In an interview a week later, not a talk show, but a long-form podcast recorded in a quiet studio, she was asked about the moment. She said, "I'm not interested in explaining my choices to people who question my right to make them." The host asked, "Do you think it changed anything?" Jennifer smiled faintly. "I don't know. But sometimes you don't need to change the world. Sometimes you just need to remind people they can walk away from the parts that are broken." The ripple effects didn't stay confined to late-night media circles. They moved outward, reaching people who had never watched The Late Show or followed Hollywood closely. A high school teacher in Oregon played the clip for her class during a discussion on personal agency. A corporate manager in Atlanta used it in a presentation about workplace respect and public pressure. The clip didn't represent scandal. It represented a moment when someone refused to give more of herself than she'd agreed to give. Jennifer Lawrence had stopped being just a movie star that week. She became something else, a mirror for a conversation many people didn't realize they were a part of. But it wasn't easy. In private, Jennifer faced the same questions that often haunt public women. Would this hurt her career? Would studios view her as difficult? Would audiences label her fragile or overreacting? She'd faced these doubts before. But this time, she had something else: distance. She didn't attend press junkets the following week. She canceled 2 appearances. Not out of defiance, but clarity. She didn't want to defend her walkout because, in her mind, it didn't need defense. It was a choice. And choices made in truth don't need public approval. Still, the industry buzzed. One studio executive anonymously told a trade publication, "She has every right to speak up. But late-night shows are platforms. Walking off doesn't help your film." Another responded, "Actually, it does. It shows the kind of person people want to watch." A month later, Jennifer's film premiered. Theaters were packed. The reviews were glowing. But something else had changed. During interviews, reporters treaded more carefully. Questions stayed focused on craft, on performance, on meaning, as if they'd remembered that acting isn't just entertainment, it's work. And actors aren't just vessels for public curiosity, they're people. Meanwhile, Colbert's show returned to normal rhythms. Guests came and went. The viral moment faded from the headlines. But inside the show's production team, there was a shift. Producers began running their questions past guests' teams more thoughtfully. Segment planning now included a recurring note: respect boundaries. And Stephen Colbert, known for being sharp and unafraid, began to show something new in his monologues: restraint. One night, several weeks after Jennifer's walkout, he said during his opening segment, "Comedy can challenge, but it shouldn't corner. And the best moments aren't the ones that shock us. They're the ones that wake us up." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what he meant. And so did Jennifer. Because sometimes the loudest legacy isn't controversy. It's a recalibration. Back in Los Angeles, Jennifer was asked in a quiet interview if she felt proud of what happened. She paused for a long time, then said, "I don't think pride is the right word. I just feel aligned." That's rare in this business. The host asked, "What would you say to younger women watching that moment? Maybe wondering if they'd be punished for doing the same?" Jennifer answered, "I'd say it's okay to value your peace more than your popularity. It's okay to leave the table when respect isn't being served." That line traveled. It became a quote people shared. It showed up on posters, on phone backgrounds, in classrooms. But Jennifer didn't repost it. She wasn't interested in turning the moment into a brand. Because for her, it had already done what it needed to do. It reminded everyone that boundaries aren't barriers. They're declarations. Weeks passed, and the media moved on. Other guests filled the couch. Other headlines grabbed attention. But for the people who had felt something stir when Jennifer Lawrence stood and walked away, the moment didn't vanish. It settled in quietly, the way all real change does. A young actress was backstage at an audition when someone said, "Don't come off too strong. Casting doesn't like that." She remembered Jennifer's walkout, and she didn't tone herself down. A journalist wrote an op-ed about the difference between challenging a guest and cross-examining one. He referenced Jennifer's moment, not as a meltdown, but as a recalibration of power in public conversations. In the months that followed, Jennifer returned to interviews, but only the ones that made space for reflection over spectacle. She appeared on a podcast hosted by a trauma-informed therapist. She discussed acting, motherhood, anxiety, and boundaries. When the host asked about Colbert, she said softly, "It wasn't personal. It was cultural, and I think the culture is finally starting to shift." She paused, then added, "Not fast enough. But it is." She didn't walk off that interview. She stayed, because she wasn't being asked to bleed for entertainment. And that was the whole point. The Colbert team never rebroadcast the segment. They didn't delete it either. It stayed in the archives, unedited, unexplained. Not a scandal, just a moment where someone said enough and meant it. Stephen Colbert never publicly apologized again, but his monologues softened. His jokes became sharper toward power and more careful with pain. In one interview, he said, "There's a difference between punching up and pushing someone down. I'm still learning the line." He didn't name Jennifer, but his audience knew. Everyone who had watched that night knew. One night, a fan asked Jennifer at a Q&A, "Would you do The Late Show again?" She smiled gently and said, "If I do, it'll be on my terms. And if not, that's okay too." Then she looked at the crowd, not with defiance, not with caution, but with clarity. Because what she had shown that night wasn't anger. It was self-respect. And in a world where women are so often told to sit still, smile politely, and tolerate discomfort for the sake of professionalism, Jennifer Lawrence had given them another option. She had stood, she had spoken, and she had left. Not to make a scene, but to make a point. A quiet revolution doesn't always begin with a march. Sometimes it starts with a sentence. "I didn't come here to explain myself." Sometimes it begins with a decision. "I won't justify my existence on someone else's terms." And sometimes it ends with a simple act of dignity. Jennifer Lawrence didn't break down. She broke through. And in doing so, she reminded millions watching that it's not about being liked. It's about being whole. She never tried to rewrite the moment, because she didn't need to. She had already written something else into the cultural script. A single scene, unpolished, unrehearsed, but unforgettable. And now, it belongs to everyone who needed to know that walking away isn't weakness. It's power. And sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who refuses to stay seated.